The auditorium was huge and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. It smelled like old books and the lemon spray they used to clean the floors. A boy sat in one of the middle rows, his body held very still. His name was Leo. Next to him, a kind-faced woman, his teacher from school, gave him a small nod. She was there to help if the noise or the lights became too much. Leo's world was often too bright, too loud. Understanding people's faces was like trying to read a language everyone else learned at birth, except him. A joke in the cafeteria, the way someone's eyes changed when they were annoyed, these were puzzles. But the piano was different. The piano made sense. Every key had one perfect note. Every piece of sheet music was a map of beautiful, logical instructions. In his room at home, with the door shut, he could build whole worlds of sound that felt safe and brilliant. Today, he was at the Crestwood Youth Music Festival. He had practiced for months. The piece he would play was a classical sonatina. It was not too long, and he knew every note, every pause, exactly as it was written. He had learned the rules, and he followed them. This was the standard division for players his age. It felt like a safe step. From the front of the auditorium, near the stage, came a whisper. It wasn't really a whisper, though. It was a voice trying to be heard. A group of teenagers, all dressed in nice clothes for their own performances, were looking back at him. One of them, a boy with slicked-back hair, smirked. "Look, it's the calculator," the boy said, not very quietly. A girl next to him giggled, hiding her mouth with her hand. "Bet he plays like one, too. All the right notes, but no soul." The words hit Leo like a physical poke. His stomach tightened. He didn't look at them. He stared straight ahead at the red curtain of the stage, focusing on his breathing like his therapist had taught him. In, out, the pattern of it. When his name was called, he stood up. The walk to the stage felt a mile long. The lights were hot and white, blinding him to the faces in the dark beyond. He found the piano stool, adjusted it carefully, just so. He placed his hands on the cool, smooth keys. This was his space now, the only space dot he began to play. His fingers moved with perfect accuracy. Every note was clear and correct. The rhythm was steady as a clock. He played the sonatina exactly as the composer wrote it, with all the right dynamics, the soft parts, the loud parts. He finished with the final chord and let his hands fall into his lap. There was a polite scatter of applause. Not the big, excited kind. The kind people give when something is fine. He looked up, squinting past the lights. The judges, 3 of them sitting at a table, were writing on their clipboards. They weren't smiling. They looked bored. One of them gave a small, professional nod. He walked back to his seat. The group of teenagers didn't say anything this time. They didn't have to. One of them just shrugged, as if to say, "See? What did we tell you?" That shrug was worse than the words. The rest of the preliminaries were a blur of noise and pain for Leo. He heard other kids play. Some made mistakes, but they played with big, dramatic swings in tempo. They swayed their bodies. The audience would murmur in appreciation. The judges would lean forward. Interested. Leo felt a cold understanding settle in his chest. They didn't want perfect instructions followed. They wanted a show. They wanted a feeling. And that was the one thing he didn't know how to fake. His teacher put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You played it beautifully, Leo." "Exactly right," she whispered. But her eyes were sad. She heard the coldness in the applause, too. That night, Leo didn't come out for dinner. His parents heard the piano. It wasn't the careful sonatina. It was something darker, more complicated. A storm of notes. They looked at each other, worried. His mother went to the door of his practice room, a small, soundproofed space they had built for him. She listened. It didn't sound like sadness. It sounded like anger, but a clean, sharp, focused kind of anger. Inside, Leo was not crying. His face was calm. He was researching. On his tablet, next to the music stand, was the digital score for a piece called Faux Follets by Franz Liszt. The name meant Will-o'-the-Wisp. Online, pianists called it a monster. They talked about how it needed impossible speed, hands that could jump and twist independently, a lightness of touch that made the notes sound like magic fairy lights. It was considered one of the hardest pieces ever written for the piano. Leo scrolled through the cascading notes on the screen. His brain, which struggled with a simple conversation, lit up. This was not about feeling. This was a complex, breathtaking math problem written in sound. It was a mountain made of pure, logical difficulty. He then opened the PDF of the music festival's rulebook. He had read it cover to cover when he first registered. He went to the last section, Final Showcase. The rules stated that after the main competition winners were announced, any registered participant could perform one piece unjudged for the audience. A gift, a fun extra. A plan, cold and clear, formed in his mind. It wasn't about winning a trophy he knew they'd never give him. It wasn't about being better than the boy with the slicked back hair. It was about communication. They thought his language, the language of rules, patterns, and precision, was lesser. They thought it had no power, no fire. He would use their own rules, their own stage, to show them what his language could do. He would speak in a tongue so difficult, so undeniably brilliant, that they would have to listen. He would play the will-o'-the-wisp, and he would make them see the fire. The cold feeling from the auditorium didn't leave Leo. It sat in his stomach like a stone for 2 days. He went to school. He did his work. But he was quiet, even for him. The memory of those polite, bored claps played on a loop in his head. It was louder and more hurtful than the snickering had been. He stopped playing the piano for everyone else. He didn't touch the simple, pretty pieces. Instead, he vanished into his soundproof room. His parents would hear the music through the door, not melodies, but whirlwinds. It was a sound of searching, of frustration, but also of intense focus. It was the sound of Leo trying to solve a problem no one had given him. His teacher from school, the one who had sat with him at the contest, came to visit. She let herself into the house, greeted his worried parents, and knocked softly on his practice room door. There was no answer, just the relentless, complicated music. She slowly pushed the door open. The room was neat, as Leo needed things to be. The metronome was off. Sheet music was filed away. But Leo was at the piano, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on his tablet screen. The music coming from his hands was chaotic, a messy tangle of notes that tried to run fast, but stumbled. "Leo?" she said softly. He didn't turn, but his hands stopped. "They think I only understand instructions," he said, his voice flat and factual. He pointed a finger at the tablet screen. On it was a dizzying waterfall of musical notes. "They think because I don't move my face like they do, I don't have anything inside to move." His teacher walked closer. She looked at the screen. She knew music well enough to feel a jolt of recognition. "Is that?" "Faux Follets." "By Liszt," Leo finished. "It translates to Will-o'-the-Wisp, the ghost lights." He finally looked at her, and his eyes weren't sad. They were sharp, like a scientist who has found a fascinating, difficult equation. "Do you know what the hardest part is? It's not the speed. It's making it sound easy, making it sound like magic. Every note has to be perfectly clear, but it has to float. It's a logic puzzle in the shape of a firefly." He wasn't talking about emotions. He was talking about engineering. He was talking about the physics of sound. "Leo, that piece, It's for the world's best concert pianists, professionals. It's famously difficult, he cut in. I know. I've analyzed the fingerings. I've mapped the hand positions. The jumps here, he zoomed in on the screen, are not about feeling. They are about geometry, muscle memory, precise measurement. His teacher sat down on the stool beside him. Why this piece? It's beautiful, but it's agony to learn. Leo tapped the rulebook, a printed pamphlet which was open on the music stand. He had highlighted a paragraph in yellow. Rule 7.4, the final showcase, he read aloud. After the award ceremony, any registered participant may perform one piece of their choosing for the audience as a non-competitive musical offering. He looked at her. It's not against the rules. I am a registered participant. They have to let me play. The plan was laid out, simple and unemotional. He wasn't asking for permission. He was stating a sequence of events. They heard my language in the preliminaries. They thought it was small. They thought it had no volume. He struggled for the word. I will use the same stage. I will use their own rule. And I will show them what my language can say when it is speaking about something complex. I will show them the fire in the logic. For the next several weeks, Leo's world shrank to the space between his piano and his brain. It was a grueling, often frustrating process. The piece was a beast. There were passages where his left hand had to skitter up and down the keys, while his right hand played a delicate dancing tune. His hands would get tangled. He would play a section perfectly 10 times, and then on the 11th, his finger would slip. He didn't throw tantrums. He didn't cry. When he made a mistake, he would stop. He would close his eyes, take a deep breath, and replay the 2-second phrase in his mind, note by note. He was debugging his own performance. He broke the 4-minute piece into 100 tiny fragments. He practiced each fragment with a slow, robotic determination until his muscles learned the path. Without his brain having to think dot, his parents watched him with a mix of awe and worry. He was eating, he was sleeping, but he was somewhere else. He was building something in that room, brick by brick, note by note. One afternoon, his father brought him a snack and lingered. He heard Leo practicing a run that sounded like water flowing over pebbles. It was astonishingly fast and clear. It sounds incredible, son, his father said. Leo paused, his hands hovering. It's not ready, he said. The second page, the middle section. The dynamic contrast isn't precise enough. It's supposed to be a whisper, then a spark. My spark is still too heavy. It's a question of millimeters in the key press and milligrams of pressure. His father didn't fully understand, but he understood the look on his son's face. It wasn't the look of a boy who was hurt. It was the look of an artist or an architect, completely consumed by the creation of something monumental. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking clarity. The day of the final competition arrived. Leo packed his sheet music, even though he had it memorized. It was a security thing. He wore the same clothes he'd worn to the preliminaries. Patterns were good. Predictability was safe. He walked back into the same auditorium. It was fuller now, buzzing with the excitement of the finals. The best players from the earlier round were there, polished and confident. He saw the group from before. The boy with the slicked-back hair was wearing a fancy suit now. He had won a second-place ribbon in his category. He held it in his hand, showing it to his friends. Leo and his teacher found seats in the back. They watched the final rounds. They heard the applause for the winners. Leo didn't flinch at the noise now. He was saving all his focus. He was running the piece in his head, section by section, a silent rehearsal. The awards ended. The crowd started to get a little noisy, ready to leave. The MC took the microphone. And now, As is our tradition, we have a little showcase. A chance for any of our wonderful participants to share one more piece, just for the love of music. A few kids went up. They played fun pop songs, short jazz tunes. The audience clapped warmly, but they were also putting on coats, gathering bags. Leo stood up. He walked to the side of the stage, to the same manager who had handed him the program weeks ago. "I'd like to play in the showcase," Leo said, his voice low but clear. The manager looked at his list. "Name? Leo." He found it. "Okay, son. You're on after this next one. What are you playing? Something fun?" Leo looked at him, his face calm. "Faux follets." The manager, an older man who knew music, blinked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He gave Leo a long, strange look, then just nodded slowly. Okay then. You're next." Leo waited in the wings. He could see the boy with the slicked back hair and his friends near the front, laughing about something. They hadn't seen him yet. He closed his eyes. He wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking about geometry. He was thinking about the weight of a finger, the distance between two keys, the map of sound he was about to draw in the air. He was ready to speak his language. The air backstage was thick with the smell of dusty curtains and old wood. From the darkness of the wing, Leo watched the performer on stage finish a cheerful, bouncy version of a popular movie theme song. The audience gave a warm, distracted round of applause. People were definitely leaving now. He could hear the shuffle of programs, the click of purses, the low hum of conversation starting up again. The stage manager, the man who had given him that strange look, patted Leo's shoulder. "All right, son. You're on. Remember, this is just for fun." The man's voice held a note of concern, as if he was sending a sailor out into a storm he'd warned him about. Leo nodded. He didn't need it to be fun. He needed it to be exact. He walked onto the stage. The main lights were bright, but the spotlight wasn't on. It made the audience a dark, shifting sea of shadows. He could make out shapes, but not faces. That was better. He went straight to the grand piano, a beautiful, shiny black beast that seemed to fill the space. He placed his folder of sheet music on the stand, though he wouldn't open it. It was a ritual, a piece of the pattern. He adjusted the piano stool, moving it a precise distance back, then centering himself to the middle C key. The noise from the audience didn't stop. A few people glanced up, but most kept chatting. From the front row, he heard a familiar, carrying whisper. It was the boy with the slicked back hair. "Oh, come on. Not this guy again," the boy said, not even trying to be quiet now. A few of his friends chuckled. "What's he gonna do? Play us a spreadsheet?" The laughter was a small, sharp sting. Leo's hands, resting on his knees, clenched for a second. He focused on the feel of the smooth wool of his trousers. He did his breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The pattern steadied him. He looked out, not at the laughing group, but past them. In the third row, he could just see the pale, worried faces of his parents. His mother had her hands clasped tightly together. His father had an arm around her shoulders. Further down, his teacher sat straight up, her eyes wide and fixed on him. She gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. Leo turned back to the piano. He placed his fingers on the keys. The ivory was cool and familiar. This was his space. This was the only place in the world where the confusing, noisy chaos outstopped and a perfect, structured world took its place. He closed his eyes for a single moment. In his mind, he wasn't in an auditorium. He was looking at the blueprint of the piece. He saw the first page, clean and sharp in his memory. He saw the opening notes, not as sounds, but as positions, movements. A sequence to initiate. He began, The first notes were a whisper, a ripple of sound so quiet that the chatter in the room almost drowned it out. It was a shimmering, strange little pattern, like seeing light dance on water from the corner of your eye. A few people near the front stopped talking and looked up, curious. Leo's hands, which had seemed so stiff and careful during his first performance, were now alive. But it wasn't a wild, emotional life. It was the quick, sure life of a master watchmaker's hands. Or a surgeon's. His right hand started a run. A cascade of notes so fast they blurred together. Yet each one was perfectly clear, like a string of diamonds falling. And his left hand answered, jumping down the keyboard in a leap that was both huge and impossibly light. The remaining conversations in the auditorium died. Not all at once, but in waves. First the front rows went silent, then the middle, then the back. The only sound was the piano, and it was a sound none of them had ever heard in this place before. The piece, Faux Follets, was true to its name. It was ghostly light, will-o'-the-wisp music. It flickered. It vanished in one place and reappeared in another. It demanded tricks that seemed like magic. Leo's left hand would play a deep, rumbling chord, and then, in the very next instant, his right hand would be at the very top of the keyboard, plinking out notes as high and bright as stars, while his left hand was already sprinting back down for the next lap. The boy who had mocked him was no longer smiling. He was staring, his mouth slightly open. His friends were frozen, their eyes wide. They weren't musicians of this level. They played Chopin and Mozart for competitions. This was something else entirely. This was a mountain they had only heard of, and a boy they had laughed at was standing at its peak. Leo's face was calm, intensely focused. A slight sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead under the hot lights. His whole world had shrunk to the feedback loop between his brain, his ears, and his hands. He was listening with extreme precision. Was that chord balanced? Was that run even? He made micro-adjustments, his body swaying just slightly with the effort, not for show, but because playing this piece was a physical feat, like running a sprint. He reached a famous section, a part where the music is supposed to sound like fairy lights twinkling and vanishing. His fingers barely seemed to touch the keys, yet a shower of crystalline notes filled the hall. A man in the audience, one of the judges from the earlier competition, leaned forward, his elbow slipping off his knee. He didn't notice. He was watching Leo's hands, a look of pure disbelief on his face. Leo's parents were crying. Not sad tears, but tears of shock, of a dawning, overwhelming realization. They had always known their son had a gift, but they had never seen it unleashed like this. They had never seen him use it to speak so loudly, so undeniably. His teacher had both hands over her mouth, her shoulders shaking. For Leo, the audience had disappeared. The mockery was gone. There was only the task. The final section of the piece was the hardest, a whirlwind that required every ounce of strength and control, trying to catch the last, fleeting sparks of light before they disappeared forever. His muscles burned. His breath came fast. But his mind was clear, directing the operation. The music built and built, a swirling storm of notes that seemed to spin faster and faster, higher and higher. And then, with two final, sharp, brilliant chords, asterisk, bang, bang. Asterisk, it was over. Leo's hands dropped from the keys and fell into his lap. The sudden silence was absolute. It was a different silence than before. Before, it had been the silence of boredom, of politeness. This was the silence of a vacuum, of air being sucked out of a room. It was the silence of all. Leo sat there, head bowed, utterly spent. He listened to the silence. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. The silence in the auditorium was a physical thing. It was heavy and full, pressing down on everyone. For a few heartbeats, nobody moved. The final sharp chords seemed to still be hanging in the air, vibrating long after the sound had faded. Leo sat at the piano, his head down, his shoulders rising and falling with deep, tired breaths. He felt hollowed out and empty, but in a clean way, like he had finally said everything he needed to say. He stared at his hands resting in his lap. They were trembling slightly from the effort, from the strange, sudden quiet. Then a single sound broke the spell. It was the sound of one person standing up, a scraping of a chair leg against the floor. It came from the judge's table. The head judge, a man with gray hair and a stern-faced Leo remembered from the preliminaries, was getting to his feet. He wasn't clapping. He was just standing, his eyes fixed on Leo, his expression unreadable. That one movement was like a signal. Another judge stood, then another. Then, like a wave starting from the front and rolling to the back, the entire audience rose to their feet. There was no cheer at first, just the rustling of clothes, the sound of hundreds of people standing. Then the applause began. It wasn't the polite, scattered clapping from before. This was a thunder. It was loud and solid and warm, filling up the huge room until the walls seemed to shake with it. People weren't just clapping with their hands. They were clapping with their whole bodies, leaning into it, their faces filled with amazement. Someone let out a loud, "Woo!" from the back, and it was followed by a burst of cheering. Leo flinched at the sudden, roaring noise. It was overwhelming, a sensory flood after the intense focus. He slowly lifted his head. The bright lights made him squint, but he could see them now, all of them, standing and facing him. The sea of shadows had become a sea of people, and they were all looking at him. For someone who spent his life trying to avoid being looked at, it should have been terrifying. But the looks he saw weren't ones of pity or boredom or mockery. They were looks of pure, stunned respect. His eyes found his parents. His mother was clutching his father's arm, tears streaming openly down her face, but she was smiling a huge, wobbly smile. His father was beaming, clapping so hard his own eyes looked wet. His teacher was jumping up and down a little on the spot, clapping wildly, laughing and crying at the same time. Then Leo's gaze drifted to the front, to the group of teenagers. The boy with the slicked-back hair was still standing, his earlier smirk completely gone. His face was pale. He was clapping, but slowly, as if in a daze. He looked at Leo, and for a second their eyes met. The boy's expression was complicated. There was shock, there was embarrassment, but there was also something else. Something like understanding. He gave a small, awkward nod. It wasn't a friendly nod, but it was a real one. An acknowledgement. Then he looked down at his feet, clapping again, his cheeks flushed red. The head judge, the one who had stood first, was walking. He stepped away from the judge's table and moved towards the stage. He climbed the few steps up the side, his movements deliberate. The audience, seeing this, began to quiet down, the applause turning into a murmur of curiosity. The man walked across the stage to the piano. Leo watched him come, unsure of what to do. He started to stand up, but the man held out a hand, gesturing for him to stay seated. The man then did something unexpected. He turned to face the audience and took the microphone from its stand. The sound system gave a soft squeal of feedback. The room went utterly quiet again. The judge looked out at the crowd, then down at Leo. His stern face had softened. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion he was trying to control. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, then paused. He shook his head and started again, speaking not as a judge to a crowd, but as one person to another. "I have been teaching, playing, and judging piano for more than 40 years. He looked back at Leo. "In all that time, I have heard that piece, Faux Follets, performed by masters. by competition winners, by concert pianists with decades of experience. He turned back to the audience, his voice growing stronger. What we just witnessed, I do not have the words for it. He looked at Leo again, and his eyes were shining. Young man, that was not a performance. That was a revelation. The technical control, the clarity. To play those notes at that speed, with such transparency, such lightness. It was fearless. It was perfect. He paused, letting his words sink in. At the preliminaries, he continued, and his voice held a note of shame, we heard you play a simple sonatina. We judged it for what it was on paper. We did not listen. We did not hear you. He looked out at the other judges, who nodded slowly, their faces solemn. We heard the notes, but we missed the musician. Tonight, you have given us a lesson. You have shown us that music is not just about the emotion we paint on top of it. It is about the absolute truth of the notes themselves. The architecture, the fire in the precision. He handed the microphone to Leo, who took it with trembling fingers. The judge put a firm hand on Leo's shoulder and gave it a squeeze before stepping back. The crowd was silent, waiting. All the eyes were on him again. The microphone felt alien in his hand. He hated speaking. Words were messy and never came out right. He looked at the dark hole of the microphone, then out at the bright blur of faces. He opened his mouth, closed it. He could feel the panic starting, the old familiar tightness in his chest. But then he thought of the music, the clear, logical map of it. He didn't need to find messy words. He just needed to say one true thing. He lifted the microphone. His voice, when it came out, was quiet and flat, but in the silent hall, it carried to every corner. It's all in the notes, he said, simply. The feeling. It's all right there in the notes. You just have to play them exactly right. He handed the microphone back to the judge and looked down at the piano keys again. For a moment, there was another silence. Then the applause erupted again, even louder than before. It was mixed now with cheers and shouts of bravo. People were nodding, some wiping their eyes. They had heard him. Not just the piano, but him. In that one simple sentence, he had explained everything. The noise was still too much, a crashing ocean of sound. But sitting at the piano, having finally been understood, Leo found he could breathe through it. He didn't smile, but a deep, quiet calm settled over him, a feeling of peace he had never known in a crowd before. The stone that had been in his stomach since the preliminaries was gone. In its place was something warm and light and his own. The roar of the crowd slowly softened from a thunderclap into a steady, warm rain of sound. Leo stayed seated at the piano, letting the waves of noise wash over him. The bright stage lights felt less like an interrogation now, and more like a spotlight on something finished, something complete. He had done what he came to do. The head judge, after giving Leo's shoulder one last, firm pat, walked off the stage, leaving him alone in the circle of light. People were still standing, still clapping. Leo knew he should probably stand up, bow, something. But the rules of performance, the social script, felt fuzzy and distant. His job was done. The music had stopped. Finally, he pushed the piano bench back. It scraped softly on the floor. He stood up, turning slowly to face the dark expanse of the audience. He gave a small, quick nod, his eyes on the floor near the front of the stage. It was all he could manage. But the crowd didn't seem to mind. Their applause swelled again, as if his simple movement was an encore in itself. He walked off the stage, his legs feeling a little unsteady. The moment he stepped into the wing, the noise was muffled. The stage manager was there, his earlier look of concern replaced by pure amazement. He didn't say anything, just shook his head and gave Leo 2 thumbs up. a wide, disbelieving grin on his face. Then Leo was surrounded. His teacher reached him first, throwing her arms around him in a tight hug he didn't know how to return. "You did it," she kept saying into his ear, her voice cracking. "You spoke. They heard you." Next were his parents. His mother was crying freely, hugging him so hard it almost hurt, covering his face in kisses. His father wrapped his big arms around both of them, his voice a rough whisper. "My son? Oh, my brilliant son." People started to press in from the hallway, contestants, parents, strangers. Faces loomed close, smiling, mouths moving with words he couldn't quite process over the ringing in his ears. "Incredible. How long have you been playing?" That was breathtaking. Hands reached out to pat his back, to shake his hand. The physical closeness, the barrage of questions and noise, was starting to overwhelm him. The calm he'd felt on stage began to crack. He could feel his breath getting shorter. His teacher saw it. She always saw it. Gently, she stepped between Leo and the crowd. "Thank you. Thank you so much," she said, her voice bright but firm. "He needs a moment. Please excuse us." With a protective arm, she guided Leo and his parents down a quieter side hallway, towards a door marked custodial. It led into a small, plain room with mops and buckets. It was quiet. It smelled of clean floors and old paper. Leo slumped against a cool concrete wall, sliding down to sit on the floor. He put his head in his hands. "Too much?" His father asked softly, kneeling down beside him. Leo nodded, his eyes squeezed shut. "The lights, the voices, the touching. It's a lot. I know, son. I know. Just breathe. You're safe here." They sat in the quiet room for a long while. No one spoke. His mother rubbed slow circles on his back. The pressure was steady and predictable. It helped. Slowly, the tight feeling in his chest began to loosen. The world, which had exploded into a blur of sound and light, started to come back into focus, piece by piece. After maybe 10 minutes, there was a soft knock on the door. The stage manager peeked in. "Sorry to bother," he said, his voice hushed. "There's someone here to see Leo, if he's up for it." Before anyone could answer, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was the boy, the one with the slicked back hair. He stood there, looking awkward, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his fancy suit pants. The second-place ribbon was still pinned to his jacket. He glanced at Leo's parents and teacher, then his eyes settled on Leo, who was still sitting on the floor. The room was silent. The boy shifted his weight. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. Leo looked up but didn't say anything. The boy took a deep breath. "Look, He struggled, his face serious. "I came to say?" That was the most insane thing I've ever heard. He wasn't smiling. He was stating a fact. I can't play anything like that. Nobody here can. He paused, looking at the floor, then back at Leo. And what I said before. In the beginning, that was really stupid of me. I'm sorry. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to be friends. He just said the words, flat and clear. It was an apology in the simplest terms. A correction of a wrong statement. Leo looked at him. He thought about the boy's smirk, the cruel whisper that had started all of this. He thought about the geometry of the piano keys, the map of the music that had been his answer. The anger was gone. It had been used up in the performance. All that was left was a kind of tired understanding. He gave a single, slow nod. "Okay," Leo said. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was an acknowledgement. The boy had said something wrong. Now he had said something to fix it. The equation was balanced. The boy seemed to understand. He nodded back. Okay. He turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth. You should be in the real competition, not the showcase. You'd win. And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Later, as they walked out of the now empty auditorium into the cool night air, Leo felt different. The world hadn't changed. The streetlights were still too bright. The cars were still too loud. But something inside him had settled. He got into the back seat of the car. His parents were talking softly in the front, their voices happy and relieved. His teacher, in the passenger seat, turned around to look at him. What happens now, Leo? She asked. What do you want to do next? Leo looked out the window at the passing buildings. For so long, music had been a private language, a shelter. Tonight, he had used it as a bridge. And it had held. I want to find another piece, he said, his voice calm in the dark of the car. A harder one. His father laughed, a sound full of joy and wonder. His mother reached back and squeezed his knee dot as they drove home. Leo replayed the performance in his head. Not the applause, not the faces, but the music itself. The perfect, logical flow of it. He thought of the judge's words, the fire in the precision. He had always felt that fire, but he thought it was a secret, a private heat only he could feel. Now he knew others could feel it too. They just needed to be shown where to look. He didn't need them to understand his world. He just needed them to respect it. And tonight, with every note of that impossible piece, he had earned that respect. The quiet boy with the piano had rewritten the rules, not with words, but with a will-o'-the-wisp made of sound. And for the first time, sitting in the quiet hum of the car, the silent space around him didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace.